What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a good week so far. So here we are back again with an ROG Ally Power Saver Guide, but this time, this is the ROG Ally Maximum Power Saver Guide, specifically for the battery life. This guide is going to focus on battery life, no matter what the cost will be. And that means quality, brightness, and even features that are primarily used for the ROG Ally to amplify your experience. There will be certain things that are disabled that are specifically made to give you the most battery life possible in your most dire situation. So that means if you're on an airplane or a long bus ride or even a long train ride, this is the guide that you're going to want to follow to get the best and absolute maximum battery life for your ROG Ally. And before anything else, you're going to want to set your ROG Ally's resolution to 720p through Command Center. And yes, that means that every game on this guide is going to be running at 720p. And the main dividing factor of this guide is the fact that we're not going to go above 720p ever. This is specifically the maximum battery life that you can get on the ROG Ally. And with some of these games, I have actually tested them for about 10 hours to get the best and longest battery life with these AAA titles. And along with setting your resolution to 720p on Armory Crate and Command Center, you're going to want to turn off Bluetooth and Wi-Fi because those take a lot of power as well. Wi-Fi consistently searches for different connections and networks to connect to, I'm pretty sure every 2 minutes or so. So it's going to take a lot of battery life out of your system. And if you have one of those live wallpapers, you're probably going to want to turn that off or switch to a static wallpaper so that the CPU and RAM aren't being used while you're already using it for your AAA games. And through Windows, you're going to want to turn on Power Saver mode because that's going to limit your RAM, CPU, and eGPU usage as well as your brightness. And of course, disable CPU boost because that takes a ton of energy and we're not going to need that for the games that I'm going to list off today at least. And we're most likely never going to need CPU boost because that takes way too much battery. And of course, enable Radeon Chill in the GPU settings in Armory Crate. And even though it's probably not recommended, but for all of these games tested, I enabled 120 Hertz mode on the ROG Ally so I can get that sweet VRR. With all of these games, VSync is disabled. And if your brightness hasn't adjusted to the appropriate level after setting Power Saver on, just put your brightness to 50% by default at the very most. I think 50% is the best, especially if you're in a car or anywhere else just waiting for a very long time. But if even after setting it to 70%, you're still having some issues seeing your game on your ROG Ally, then I recommend getting an anti-UV screen protector like I did. But yes, let's get started with this maximum power saver guide for the ROG Ally. And the first game is Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, of course. And I managed to get 4 hours and 10 minutes with this title. So that is Nintendo Switch level battery life with a game like Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. And of course, I set the graphic level in order to make the game look as good as possible with as much battery life as possible with a consistent 30 FPS. But before anything, I set the TDP to 7 watts. And yes, that is the minimum amount of wattage that you can set on your ROG Ally. So all you have to do is go to Command Center, switch your TDP usage to manual, and set everything to the lowest TDP. Now, with 7 watts, you might drop in frames by about 2 to 3. So you might be seeing frames of 27 FPS. If you want an absolute steady 30 FPS, I do recommend setting your TDP to 8. But in most instances, it's a lot more impressive if you set it to the minimum TDP, and you'll get about 20 more minutes of battery life. But with 8 watts, I managed to get 4, and with 7 watts, I managed to get 4 hours and 10 minutes plus. So if the 10 minutes aren't worth a frame rate that isn't a steady 30, then you might want to switch over to 8 watts. And now let's get into the graphics settings, and this is where everything counts. I set the resolution windowed mode to borderless full screen, and I set the resolution in total to 1024 by 576, and I locked the frame rate to 30 FPS, set all settings to either medium or high, and depending on how much detail you would like to be displayed, if you set the graphics settings to medium, then you could set the TDP to 7 watts. But if you use high settings like I did, then in order to get a consistent 30 FPS, the TDP will need to be set to 8 watts. And out of everything, I wasn't using the official Steam version of Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain. I was using a third-party version because sometimes Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain Pain requires an internet connection, and if you absolutely are in your most dire situation possible with battery life, location, and just entertainment, then you're most likely not going to want to use an official version that requires an internet connection every time you start the damn thing. So I personally used a third-party version, which enabled me to close Steam completely. And closing Steam for these third-party titles will lend you even more battery life for your time. But if you have to run Steam, try running Steam in big picture mode and closing every other application. But if you prefer to play Metal Gear Online, like those other 5 people in the comment section do, then using the Steam version would be your only option at that point. But going online and using Wi-Fi will inevitably use up battery life. And for the majority, I play Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, single player, offline mode, without Steam running, and it gave me that amount of battery life. As long as you buy the game, using a third-party version is fine. I don't recommend just getting third-party versions willy-nilly and never touching the Steam version. You gotta support the platform and the developers who made it, even if they are Konami. And moving on to the next game, and of course it is one of my favorite games of all time, and that is Resident Evil 2 Remake. I managed to get 4 hours with this title as well. I set the TDP to 7, set the resolution to 720p, the render mode in the graphic settings was set to interlaced, like it always is, but the frame rate was actually locked to 30 FPS, and all the settings were set to low. Like with the previous title, if you set the TDP to 8, that will give you freedom to higher up your graphic settings to medium with a consistent 30 FPS, but it'll give you a lot less battery life, say 20 minutes less. But of course, if you're using low graphic settings, and if you want a higher FPS to say 60, then uncapping that FPS and setting the TDP to 8 will help you out a lot. And of course, and naturally, playing Resident Evil 2 Remake for 4 hours on a handheld device such as the ROG Ally is an absolutely amazing time, and I highly recommend trying these settings and of course picking up Resident Evil 2 Remake, because even though it seems like it, I haven't mentioned this game enough. And the next title was a bit of a doozy, and that is Marvel's Avengers Definitive Edition. So this is the version of Marvel's Avengers with all of the DLC, with capped graphics updates, and just overall the best experience you can get with Marvel's Avengers if you like this game. So I managed to get 3 hours and 30 minutes with this title. I had to set the TDP to 9 because for some reason Marvel's Avengers uses a ton of CPU power, but I did not enable CPU boost. CPU boost is still disabled for this title, and I had to turn off FSR because it just looked too dang ugly at 720p, and I set the dynamic resolution to 30 FPS. So dynamic resolution is enabled for this game, and of course the FPS is limited to 30, but you have to actually limit it through Command Center because there is no actual limiter in Marvel's Avengers graphic settings. And I set all the graphic settings to their lowest possible points, all with the exception of lens flares and screen effects being left on, but everything else is off and at its lowest graphic setting. And obviously with 11 to 15 TDP, these games play worlds better. But the main focus of this test is to see exactly how low we can get the TDP with the best quality settings, even if they are at their lowest point, like with Avengers. So as far as Marvel's Avengers, it seems to be the only game on this list that uses a lot of CPU power, to the point even 8 watts wasn't enough to keep a steady FPS, even with dynamic resolution enabled along with FSR set to performance mode. So 9 watts was the definitive wattage to use with Marvel's Avengers Definitive Edition. And I'll probably cover this game in my ultimate power saver guide at a different time. And like I said before, quality is not the focus, but it is something that you need in order to get immersed in the game. So these are just the best settings that I could possibly get while still maintaining Marvel's Avengers quality as well as its FPS. And the next game on the list is Dishonored 1. I managed to get 4 hours and 10 minutes with this title. I set the TDP to 7 and the resolution was set to 720p. The graphic settings were just kept at default because this is an Xbox 360 era game. It doesn't need any extra elbow grease in order to run it, but you have to make sure to turn the rat shadows off. For some reason, there's a lot of rats in this game, similar to A Plague Tale. And you can either limit the FPS to 30 or it will fluctuate from 35 to 45 consistently, which is very annoying. Setting the FPS to 30 will enable it to become a lot more steady. And of course, setting it to 30 will save a lot of battery life as well. And moving on to the final game on the list, and that is of course Lies of P. Now, I've been waiting for this game to arrive in certain forms for a long time. And surprisingly, with Lies of P, I managed to get 4 hours with this game. And the TDP was set to 7, which is the minimum. The resolution was set to 720p. For some reason, Lies of P works so dang good. It's one of the best Souls-like games that I've played in a long time because it's easy to grasp and it's optimized extremely well. And of course, the aesthetic and the storyline is absolutely amazing and I love it. The screen mode was set to maximum screen and the graphic settings were all set to low, with FSR set to balanced, with sharpening at 0.5, and fidelity CACAO was set to off, because that seems to knock off 1 or 2 more FPS every second. And the max frame limit was set to unlimited. And of course, like with the rest of the games, VSync is turned off. And just a reminder, in Command Center, make sure to set the refresh rate to 120 Hz and the FPS limiter to 30. Now, Lies of P is an exceptional game, and playing it for 4 hours is way more than enough time to progress through the game enough to have an immersive and satisfying experience, just like with a Nintendo Switch. But with most of these titles, the quality of the games are a little better than a Nintendo Switch. But with this guide, I'm not scared to bring the quality down to Nintendo Switch levels in order to get the battery life that I desire, and that you rightfully deserve as a gamer and a supporter of the handheld. And these tests have proven that ROG Ally can have Switch-like battery along with Switch-like graphics or even better to help. And again, make sure your base resolution for your desktop is set to 720p. It will help with performance and overall battery life, because every time you minimize your game or something like that, if you have your desktop set to 1080p, your ROG Ally will go back into 1080p whenever you do minimize your game. So just make sure to set everything to 720p for the best experience and the smoothest experience possible. And I do recommend setting the aspect ratio manually and not automatically, because sometimes the games will not automatically set your aspect ratio to 16:9, and for some reason that seems to confuse the ROG Ally when you minimize the game, even if you have your core resolution to 720p, and in some cases it'll limit the resolution to the point you won't be able to see the rest of your ROG Ally screen. So with setting the internal resolution and the game's resolution to 720p, just make sure that you manually set the aspect ratio to 16:9 just to be safe. But it is awesome to know that all of these settings with the maximum battery life is just an option that you have in your most dire and needful times as a gamer, or if you simply just want to be entertained. If you want to ignore all of these settings and just play at 1080p, I have another guide for that. It's called the ROG Ally Ultimate Power Saver Guide. It does focus on higher resolution or resolution that is equivalent to 1080p if you can't get the appropriate battery life with said quality. And of course, if you just want to do whatever you want, you can, because you have the ROG Ally, which has a ton of power and all of those options readily available for you. I personally prefer to play with max resolution, and that's why it's taken me so long to make this specific guide, because I haven't been in any situation where I didn't bring a power bank to support my 1080p needs. But I realize that there are a lot of people that don't have those $80 to $100 power banks, and most likely don't want to carry around a power bank along with their ROG Ally, so I figured this is the best course of action and the best series and guide to introduce to those gamers. And I respect those gamers. They just want to play their game for as long as possible on a device as beautiful as the ROG Ally. And I will continue to look for even higher battery saving options to share with you all. And thank you so much for watching. If I left anything out, let me know in the comments below. And I hope you guys have a good one. Later.